It's very important, this whole idea of God creating the kinds, reproducing after their kinds, this biological law set down in Genesis 1. And so it's no surprise that the evolutionists have got this whole thing about those family trees, phylogenetic trees, trying to figure out the whole deal about species, which Carolus Linnaeus, who coined the whole term after the biblical term of kinds, species, being things that can reproduce with each other and things that can't, reproducing after their kind. And that has been the standard for what a species is for 400 years. Oh, but for evolution to work, you're going to have to change that so it becomes a tangled path. And take a look at this. They're looking at different kinds of sparrows interbreeding with each other, different kinds of swordtail tropical fish breeding with each other, but not really different kinds in the capital kind, but different varieties really within the same biblical kind, really within the same species. So they'll call them subspecies. They'll do anything to blur the distinction because this is necessary. I don't really think the evolutionists are doing this on purpose. I think the devil is smarter at deception than any person. By the way, I'm going to talk about this for a little longer than usual. This might be a 9-minute or something because it's a long article. Look at this. Blurred the lines between species. They've blurred the lines between species. The reproductive barriers that exist. The process of speciation. Let's talk about it like it really is happening. The speciation genes that are conducting this process of speciation, like it can really happen. They don't understand it, and you'll see in the rest of the article, it's just a belief of theirs. Look at this. Let's see. Those lines are a side effect of genetic tweaks species gather by chance while adapting to new environments. Adapting like it's a verb. God gave different species adaptations. Like you can sweat when the room gets hot. That's an adaptation to a changing environment. And then natural selection will knock out anyone that doesn't have the adaptations to survive an ice age. Chihuahuas wouldn't survive an ice age. St. Bernards would. If global warming really went full blast, St. Bernards would go extinct and Chihuahuas would be thriving, leaping around the planet, and so on. Natural selection is real. We can see that. But this idea that genomes actually create new DNA when it's needed, there's no mechanism for that to happen. Only fake beliefs. Look at this. Darwin's finches on the Galapagos Island, they admit here that Darwin's finches are just breeding with other finches. And they're calling them, subspecies and things like that. But these are finches breeding with finches, which is kinds reproducing after their kinds, like the Bible says. And they're saying, whoa, all of these things are problems we're only now beginning to understand. No. We'll see in some future articles, because I have 3 on this subject, that the more data they're getting, the more confused they're getting because they're going at this from an evolutionary presupposition. That's their only reason why they're confused. If they would just stick with the Bible science, things would be much, much clearer to them. Okay, so they've got all these things about what happens with inbreeding and things like that. Let's see, here we go. Yeah, they're calling subspecies now, which is really what the old term variety was. Like there are different varieties of roses and different varieties of azaleas and people. But these are not subspecies. Oh, the dividing line is a little fuzzy. Only because they make it fuzzy. I mean, come on, Neanderthals were people. Africans and Caucasians and Asians and Native Americans, they're all people. The Bible says humans are of one blood. There's one race, the human race. And there's no such thing as races. That was made up by people who just didn't like the way other people looked. And that's very politically incorrect and biblically incorrect. So, and they tried breeding these mice and making all these hybrid lines. Of the 738 lines they created, 95% died out. They just went extinct. It couldn't work. And this is because these mice, the wild mice and the domestic mice, they got separated, and they're the same species, the same kind, but they got different mutations over the centuries, and different family groups within the mouse kind, just like in the human kind, develop different coping mechanisms and compensations to deal with these different mutations that happen in the different families. And so eventually it can get so bad that the two families can't interbreed effectively because they don't have the compensations for the mutations that are in the other group. Now, also, when there's too much inbreeding within the same gene pool, the mutations actually build up. You get more and more mutations in the same family. Don't forget, Abraham married his half-sister Isaac, and that was back before the mutations had built up in the population of humans and other things. And back then, inbreeding wouldn't have been such a bad thing. I mean, after all, everyone descended from Abraham and Sarah. Turned out that's a very good gene pool. It worked just fine. But centuries later, Moses in Leviticus forbid inbreeding. Thou shalt not uncover the nakedness of thy mother's daughter, thy father's daughter. You're not allowed to marry your sister or your brother centuries after Abraham and Sarah. And that's because it would have become medically dangerous to do so by that time. And you'd have all of these extinction things happening. Okay, so the whole idea, the whole blurring, the whole confusion is necessary if you're going to cling to a Darwinian view of genetic biology. Okay, yeah, here we go. And this is interesting too. Of the lines of males that were still fertile, let's see, 183 lines, 99 could produce after a while, only by outbreeding. The more mutations that are in a family line, the more important it is to outbreed where possible. This is why humans, what we call interracial marriage, the individuals are very genetically healthy, whereas inbreeding is actually increasing the incidence of mutations that are dangerous and many others that aren't. But the dangerous ones like cystic fibrosis, Tay-Sachs disease, sickle cell anemia. These are inbreeding situations from a mutation that occurred in a family line. And if you outbreed, it can help at least stay off the extinction of the human race. But inbreeding of animals in zoos is known to be a very dangerous thing because the buildup of mutations aren't good, but evolutionists hail them as the harbinger of new species. But then why are they so worried about these mutations in zoos? They know. People who actually try to do stuff with the genetics, who try to keep the hippopotamus line, it's been very much in the news lately, alive, they know you can't inbreed. You got to get some hippos from another zoo to date. Well, there's another story. They said it's not easy to figure this out. Their speciation gene. This one guy at UCal Berkeley says, I've been searching for the speciation gene for 10 years and I haven't found one. Somebody else somewhere else did find one gene that they've identified as one that could be one of these things they'd need to make speciation happen. But they admit later they really don't understand how this could possibly actually work. Oh, and the whole idea, speaking of mutations, of endogenous retroviral sequences in our DNA. When I debated a grad student at the med school at University of Oklahoma several years ago, it was brought up that 90,000 herbs are there in our DNA and chimp DNA, but I pointed out that only 12 to 14 of them actually are in the positions in the DNA that make evolution look good. And I asked my opponent in the debate if they didn't see that as a nice coincidence. The odds are that 12 to 14 might go your way in 90,000 chances. And I said, doesn't that look bleak to you? And she said, oh no, if there was just one, that'd be enough for me to believe in evolution. Well, only if you already, keep the faith as far as that sort of thing goes. Okay. Any of you that studied high school biology and studied mitosis and meiosis will understand the term crossover. They didn't use it there, but they called pairing of chromosomes to exchange hits with each other, bits of DNA with each other, is an important force in evolution. Well, you know what? It's an important force in genetic diversity, but since it cannot do anything but exchange bits of DNA, it doesn't create and cannot. The process has zero potential for creating new DNA that never existed before, because it's just exchanging of already existing DNA. But they call it evolution because they like to, not because it's logical or scientific. This is not new genetic material. Oh yeah, during evolution. They just have to talk about evolution all the time. It's really self-talk that encourages them and keeps the whole thing going for them. Okay, let's see here. Where else did they make mistakes in this article, or can we show up how they're doing? Oh yes, forming new species. It's just a mantra. You have to say it over and over again till you believe it, and everyone else that listens to you does. Look at this. Now look what they said about these sparrows. The Italian sparrow and the house sparrow, they purged DNA from each other, like they did it on purpose. No, these are DNA parts that just didn't work in the rebreeding of these two branches of the sparrow kind because of this isolation thing I was talking about. Natural selection, just natural, is a knee-jerk reaction to the attempt to combine these genomes. It wasn't something they did on purpose. Purging, house cleaning, makes it sound like there's some god of evolution, like Darwin's still alive and he has power to do things with the DNA of living things. This is not deliberate. It's a knee-jerk natural selection reaction to what things will still work. But look at what they say here again. This whole deal, this whole understanding is an unsolved problem. They don't really understand this, but they say all these things like they got it, they nailed it, and they haven't. Okay, now there is one thing that's interesting. They found a gene that seems to prevent cells from dividing if things just aren't right inside the DNA of the cell. That sounds like something God might have put there to keep the kinds reproducing only after their kinds. Arrested cell division is a problem when they're trying to interbreed these fruit flies, the Drosophila, melanogaster, and others. Oh, I just love the way they keep saying becoming separate species, becoming separate species. There's no real such thing as that. Now, some creationists will say to me, oh no, Dr. Jackson, you can't go around saying that speciation doesn't happen. Because it does. Well, it depends on what your definition of a species is. If you're talking about varieties within the kind, okay. It may be that the delineation of kind and species is inaccurate, that the real kind is like more the genera or the family level, like the dog family, the dog kind, Canidae. I think that, if I remember, bears are in the canid family, but they're the only ones that can't interbreed with all the other Canidae that I'm aware of, and so they might be actually misplaced in the wrong family. And in some cases, maybe even the order level is what really the kind is. But whatever the kind is, that's what Linnaeus meant to be the species. Okay, arrested cell division could be a mechanism God put there in Genesis to make sure kinds only reproduce after their kinds. So I was saying about that. Okay, let's see. They keep on going on and on about how these sparrows deliberately purged some DNA from their genome. There's some DNA that my family and yours too would want to purge from your DNA, is some of the deleterious things, or some of the family inherited oncogenes, or the cancer-causing genes, or the addictive genes, and things like that, predispositions to blood sugar problems, and inherited predispositions to allergies. There are a bunch of things I'd purge from my DNA if I could. It's funny, these sparrows figured out a way to do it, even though humans can't. Okay, and that's the issue of Science News and the article. It's really really sad. The evolutionary mindset is stagnating the science of genetics. Next time we're going to see another article about the fuzzy art of defining species. You know, it's really really clear kinds reproducing after their kinds, but if you're an evolutionist, fuzzy is your friend. Smoke and mirrors, shadows. Dr. Gary Parker said, evolution science thrives in the gray areas, in the areas where there's a lack of data, and dies in the light and where new data actually is brought in. So sorry for how long this was, but I'm kind of needing to teach a longer lesson on this subject, and we'll have two more things about speciation and the interbreeding and things and the problems of the definition of species that evolutionists are having, and we'll culminate that with a recent article on dinosaurs and how they can't figure out where the dinosaur family ends and begins because there's so many species. And yet we know those things didn't interbreed, and they certainly didn't come from each other. Kinds have been reproducing after their kind only since God created the world. Maybe those genes that keep cells from dividing, maybe mutations have actually ruined the DNA that God originally put in us from the effects of the fall, the curse, so badly that some hybridization between kinds has been able to happen, like many awful things have been able to happen genetically to all living things on the planet. And that might be why it's easier. Maybe some hybrids are really between two kinds. Now, I do not know the theology of that, whether the fall could actually invalidate the separation of the kinds or not, but I'll leave that up to theologians. Scientifically, it's possible. I'm not saying it is what's happening, but I am saying evolutionists have decided that species has got to be blurry. Kinds has got to be blurry. They've got to get rid of that concept, or evolution just couldn't be true. Guess what? You keep thinking. God bless.